Okay, hi everyone. So I am happy to announce that we're aiming for a high bar here, but this time we were able to get the speaker to join without any technical difficulties. I actually told Skulk that uh, this is one of the very few occasions where I go like, okay, cool. We're literally just waiting for it to start now. Usually I just try and like figure stuff out last minute, or I just like cram in like, okay, let me tell you how it works and whatever. Yeah, so fingers crossed. Let's see how it goes. But yes, oh geez, where do I even start introducing Skulk? Yeah, like I actually don't want to do too much of an introduction because he's one of those people that are so, I was want to say, multifaceted and involved in so many different things that I would probably prioritize one thing over the other, and that would probably be the one that he cares about the least. So I'll leave that up to him. But yeah, just some super quick housekeeping. Tonight it's just me and Skulk. So Skulk Venter and Skulk Neetling. And this is kind of a FEDSA monthly community event. So we tend to do these every month. We also do loads of other things. We do in-person events. We have an in-person event in Cape Town coming up on Saturday. If I'm not mistaken, it's around Figma and the new dev mode stuff they added. So Justin will be exploring that a bit. He'll be doing a workshop on that and so forth. And then also we also run something else called JavaScript Breakpoint, where it's effectively myself and Ben Yannick, Xandor, and Mike, and we just chat about what happened in JavaScript this month. So we have a specific Halloween edition coming up on the day of Halloween, where we talk about some scary stuff in JavaScript. Yeah, that's about it. Like usually Justin, when he does this overview thing, he has some slides and stuff. So we're keeping it informal. I'm also, if I understand correctly, Skull, correct me if I'm wrong, but you also don't necessarily have slides prepared. You're really going to do hands-on and just kind of demo some stuff and so
Yeah.
forth. So yes. So I think with that out of the way, I'm super happy for you to introduce yourself. Also, share a bit about what you're going to be showing and demoing now. I'll maybe hang around here on the second screen, given that you don't have any presentations or stuff, and I'll maybe also ask some questions while you go, and we can also chat about some of the stuff. But yeah, I'm happy to hand over to you, and then yeah, you can get us into it.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Skulk. Hey, everybody. It's weird to say everybody, and I only see you. So yeah, as Skulk said, my name's also Skulk Neetling. And I think for today, what I want people to take away from this is a general excitement for open source, because I've been in this world for quite some time, and I find it exciting. I'm going to acknowledge some of the challenges, because this is not a perfect world by any means, but we're going to try and focus on the positive side here. So that's what I want you to take away from. There's a lot to talk about, and I've gone back and forth a couple of times on how I should present all this information, and that's why I decided, like, I'm not going to bother with slides and all those things. I'm going to kind of like jump on GitHub, and we're just going to do some stuff. And as we do it, we'll talk about some of the details and why I do things the way I do. And hopefully it'll be insightful in multiple ways that way. We'll see if it works. We'll see what people think afterwards. But a little bit about me. So I have been in the developer industry for like 15 years, maybe a bit longer. I can't remember how long, so I just say 15 years. And I've been in the corporate world, and I've been at Mozilla for 12 of those years, which is a very long time. And a lot that I know about open source is from stuff I learned at Mozilla. Now I am attempting to build my own company, taking the values that I loved and learned and the reasons why I joined Mozilla, and I'm trying to like take that and breathe life into this thing called Mechanical Ink. Right now, I still do quite a bit of consulting work, to keep the lights on, pay the bills, all that kind of stuff. But, you know, down the line, I'd like to see where I can take this. I have a heavy focus on web accessibility, because that is another passion of mine, like open source is. I do a lot of podcasts, and It's a combination of lifting the voices of entry-level folks, but then also amplifying the voices of people in open source, acknowledging the challenges, but also then talking about the good things and how we can make this thing, because sustainability is something we'll slightly touch on. That is a challenge in open source. And I got into open source through Java. I don't know how many people went that route, but that was my route. When I learned Java, it was still part of some microsystems, and it was a really open source thing. It had everything that is open source about it. And through that, I discovered the Apache Foundation, and through them, I discovered stuff like the Apache server, and then the Tomcat server that we used to serve a lot of Java stuff. And then later on, I learned about JBoss, not part of Apache, but also a big open source project. And I just found it amazing to think there's these big pieces of software that I don't have to write, I don't have to pay for, and it just gives me this ability to just make stuff. So, the internet came along and gave us this first little bit of interconnecting all of us. But now if you want to be on the internet, how do I get there? Like, I need a web server. I don't want to have to write my own web server. And thanks to open source, you don't have to. These are like things that's been solved. There's now it's like, which web server should I choose? Because there's so many, like, is there Nginx, Apache? Do people still? And no, does it, like, these days you just npm run and magically a server spins up and there you go. So, and it's open source, it's driving all of this. Now, for example, when the AI thing came out and everybody was like, OpenAI, I was like, that name really irked me quite a bit because it's not open at all. It started open, strangely enough, by the man that I will not name because I don't know where his name falls on the scale of problematic to okay anymore. So I'll just treat him like Voldemort. So
I wanted to say we're going to get demonetized by YouTube, but we're not even monetized in the first place. So yeah, no harm.
Cool. So, when OpenAI was founded, it was founded on the idea that it should be open. But at some point in time, things went, ugh. But with that, say, ChatGPT and all the things, and then Google with everything they did, Google came out and said, none of us, we don't have any moat. We have nothing. Open source won. And it's because of the incredible pace of innovation that can happen when you work in an open collaborative space. And I think that's one of the things that I love about open source, is this idea that a bunch of people are just coming together and saying, we have identified a problem and we want to solve it. Or you have something that you want to exist in this world and you make it and you're like, why keep it to myself? And you put it out there and nothing happens. Or other people see it and say, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you made this thing. This is exactly, but can I make it a little bit like this? Because I'd like to have this. And you're like, sure thing, that makes total sense to me. And now you're contributing and you're making it a little bit better and you're adding something to it. And that is this whole collaborative thing. And at the end of the day, you end up with this amazing project. And, I can name a whole bunch of things, but I mean, just search for open source on the internet and you'll find everything that's come out of that. But I want to touch on two core things. I think the first thing I want to touch on is Richard Stallman started the Free Software Foundation way back in the 80s. And there's this documentary called The Code, which is largely about Linux. And I think Linux is the poster child for open source. It changed everything. The whole concept of an operating system is something you buy from a big corporate company and you get it on a disk and you put it in, and it just obliterated that entire notion. Now you'll be hard pressed to find anything that's not running Linux in one way, shape, or form. And it's partly because of the GPL that was used and the way that things need to be licensed based on that license. And it's just because it works. It just works for the most part, depending on your hardware. Sometimes it can be troubling, but it's fine. It's gotten a lot better. But in that movie, in that documentary, it starts off with Richard Stallman making an analogy. And I'm going to just like pull it up in front of me, and none of you will see it, but just so I don't butcher it. And he starts it off by saying, let me make an analogy between programs and recipes. A program is a lot like a recipe. Each one has a list of steps to be carried out with rules that had to tell when you're done and when to go back. And at the end, there's a certain result. Now, if you cook, you probably exchange recipes with your friends, and you probably exchange and you change those recipes. That's one of the key things. You exchange and you change. And if you've made some changes and you like the results and your friends like eating it, well, then you might give those to your friends. Now, imagine a world where you can't change your recipe because somebody has gone out of their way to set it up so that it is impossible to change. And imagine that if you share your recipe with your friends, they will call you a pirate and try to put you in prison for years. When I heard that, I got chills. I was like, whoa. It's one of those moments where you realize what this is all about. It's about this idea that the way we move forward is by sharing what we learn. I think one of the most recent things that might be very apt to share is the reason the vaccines were developed so quickly during COVID is because of open science. And because of this idea that you don't have a bunch of labs all working in isolation, you have open data sharing. And because of that, people can riff off each other's the findings that they have instead of each person just working on their little narrow focus area. So this whole idea of having something and then riffing off of it, learning from the past and improving things, it allowed us to accelerate so much faster than we ever could if each person was trying to do it alone and starting from scratch every time. So I think that, I don't know, that to me was just, I love that quote. So I just wanted to share that. But what is open source? Now, open source is defined by the Open Source Initiative. They have the official open source definition, and you can read it. But if you break it down into its essence, so to speak, then it revolves around the following things. Anyone should be able to freely distribute work classified as open source in whole, in part, or as part of a larger aggregate. Now, the interesting thing about that larger aggregate is, so the aggregate meaning it's a combination of different open source packages. Now, people who work especially in the node world and that kind of thing knows very well what this idea means. When you go npm-i, you're installing a big aggregate of individual open source packages. Now, two things about that aggregate is you can give that away, this new thing that you've made that's a combination of things, but you can also sell it. You can sell that as a product and make money from it. It doesn't, now that thing that you're selling, that is not open source anymore. But truly open source doesn't prevent you from doing that. That is why things like Llama and those things aren't truly open source, because they come with a caveat, which says, you can use this as long as you're not competing with me. At that point, you can no longer do with this what you want. Now you need to speak to me and we need to get to some other terms. That means it's not truly open source. The aggregate also doesn't have to be all open source. So that opens this idea that we've all seen. There's a whole other conversation about how people feel about that, but open source doesn't prevent you from doing this. So you can have open source, build on top of it, and distribute that. Now, not everything in that aggregate is open source. Some of it is actually proprietary. Again, that aggregate is no longer open source, but the open source packages that's inside of it cannot prevent you from doing that. Now, the other thing that's interesting is the original, and I say that with emphasis for a reason, the original source code of the program, and we're talking very code now here, but this applies to other areas, other things that's open source too. But the OSI license is heavily focused on code, so that's why I'm focusing on that. So the original source code of the program needs to be available or attainable. What that just means is you need to be some way you should be able to get to the source code. They say preferably by downloading it from the internet at no additional cost. Now, here's the interesting thing. Original source code means just that. If the code is obfuscated in any way, it's not open source anymore. If you have written your code in TypeScript, you've run it through the transpiler, and you distribute the JavaScript, that's not open source because the source, the TypeScript source, is not available. So if it's obfuscated or it's been pre-processed, transpiled in any way, and you're only distributing the output of that, it's not open source. You need to distribute the original code. That is what needs to be distributed. And open source should also allow you to create derived works, distribute those derived works under the same license, or depending on the license you've chosen originally, you might be able to change the license. We'll look at that a little bit in a second. And then the big one that to me is so interesting that it's baked into the official definition, but that it's also a problematic factor, is the fact that it completely states that no discrimination against people, groups, or fields of endeavor. So open source is not allowed to discriminate on any of those. And why I say it's an interesting thing is because it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So the one thing that comes out of that is, oh, so that means somebody can take my open source project and use it to do nasty things, and I cannot stop them from doing that. This is true. There is a new license in the works that essentially allows you to add a clause to it to prevent people from doing that. It's essentially, I can't remember the exact name now, I keep forgetting it, but it basically allows you to say, you can use this freely, except if you're going to use it in any way, shape, or form that could hurt people or cause doxing or anything like that. So that's pretty cool because that is a problem that is hard to get around. And the other thing is, unfortunately still, it's gotten a lot better, and there's a lot of people that care about this, that's doing a lot of work around this, but the open source world community is still very one-sided. It's still a lot of what everybody says, white male dominated, and and not as friendly and welcoming to everybody as it can be and should be, because like I said, baked into the definition is no discrimination against people, groups, or fields of endeavor. So it behooves us to fix this, because if we truly believe in open source and we truly believe in the power of open source, then this is part of it, and we need to address this as much as we care about all the other parts. That's very code. So I think that for me is the most important things about the kind of raw topic of open source. So I think at this point, I'm going to jump into doing more practical things. Now, before I jump in, I want to mention a couple of things. So I'm going to be talking about Git, but of course, it's not the only source control system that exists. I started back in the day with Subversion, which also many people know as SVN. At Mozilla, I also used Mercurial for some time. They still use Mercurial for quite a bit of stuff. And there's like all kinds of proprietary things as well. I remember when I was at Vodacom, they had this whole IBM thing. It was a nightmare to use, but it was what we had. But Git is ubiquitous. It's probably the most, I feel pretty confident saying it's the most used source control system at the moment. Then again, GitHub is like Git. It's probably no surprise that GitHub, one's really popular, so the other one. But I think GitHub has done a lot of amazing stuff that's beyond just creating a better UI for Git. So it's doing a lot for open source. It's doing a lot for community. It's doing a lot for collaboration. So I want to acknowledge that. But at the same time, I've spoken to some folks about this, and I've also listened to enough podcasts to know that this is being talked about quite a bit now. And that is that with any large distributed system, you never want a single point of failure. And for a lot of people in projects, GitHub has become a single point of failure. We've all experienced this when, oh, my Git push doesn't want to go through, so I have nothing I can do. And most of the time it's 5-10 minutes and everything's back to normal again. But what if that happens for a month? What will happen to the software industry and industries impacted by software, which is pretty much everything? So there are also alternatives. There's GitLab, but then there's also bigger like open source projects like Codeberg that is gaining a lot of popularity. And I think it's a good idea to, as you back up your hard drive, maybe also push your code to more than one place. Maybe push your code to GitHub and use that as your main collaboration environment and where you work, but push a copy of it to Codeberg, just so you have that, you don't have that single point of failure. So with that out of the way, I'm going to focus on GitHub and Git, but I do acknowledge that while these things are ubiquitous, there's problems within that aspect of it. Now, how do I share my screen? This might be our first technical challenge.
Well, let's get into it. So it's nothing like actually figuring this out during and talk about open source. So it's as open as you can get. You guys are seeing how the sausage is made here. So I think there's a button at the bottom that says present, if I'm not mistaken.
Aha, there's a share screen over there.
Yes. Interestingly enough, it's not very accessible. So we had, I can't remember his name. He works for Equal Experts, a blind developer. And like your man, like he really struggled. I had to really guide him through it. So yeah, it's interesting. Not very accessible. But yeah, did you click it?
Yes.
Yes, and here we go. All right.
Okay, now we have Inception happening. So let me move out of Inception. All right. So this is GitHub for those who don't know, and this is the dashboard. It's a lot going on here. I've kind of triple checked sort of to make sure, because I have access to quite a lot of stuff on GitHub that either through the feature previews, which by the way, you can get to over here. And I have almost everything enabled. There's a new one that I'm going to enable right now. Maybe I shouldn't. Let me not do that. But I also have access to some other features because I've been involved with GitHub for a very long time. But I'm pretty sure the stuff that I'm going to be using now today isn't anything that I have exclusive access to. But if there's something that doesn't quite work for you, let me know after, and I'd be happy to guide you as to an alternate way to do it. So yeah, I think
that's maybe worth checking is, do you have a pro account?
I used to. I think I don't anymore.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay, so then no issues. All right.
Yeah, it should be good. Should be good. Okay, so where to start? Okay, so I think the very first thing you might want to do on GitHub is maybe you're not ready to quite start your own project, so you might want to look for something that you can contribute to. Now, I think one of the topics that I wanted to talk about is finding a community. So I think, first of all, think about what it is that you like to do or that you would like to learn more about. I'm going to highlight a couple of communities just because I've been involved and I've found them to be really welcoming. So the first one is MDN, and for those who've known me for a while, wouldn't really be surprised by this. But so one of the ways you can quickly jump to an organization on GitHub is if you use Command K, it brings up this that you've probably seen on a lot of other places, and you can like start typing in. And now here it's showing me some of the repositories. But if I just hit enter here on MDN, it's taking me to info because this was the top one. But anyway, let's go back there. And so here's the organization. And if you scroll down, you can see all the repositories. And this is generally going to be filtered or not filtered. It's going to be ordered by the most active ones. Now, on MDN, you can contribute to it in a couple of ways. You can technically contribute to the source code that makes up the website that you interact with. It's a project called Yari. So you can use this search here to filter down. I wouldn't say this is a good place to start contributing to MDN for a couple of reasons. Some of it is just this part of the platform is very much in flux at the moment. And so it's going to be a little tricky to know if the thing that you're wanting to do, even if it's an issue that exists, is actually still an issue. It might be something that has been deprioritized. It might be something that's just not going to happen anymore. So because of that uncertainty, I don't want anybody to start contributing to a repository like that. I want you to have a good first experience. And in that, I kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit. So what I would suggest you do is focus on the content repo. So the content repo, it's the one over here. That one is the English content of MDN. So if you browse the MDN Web Docs website in English, that's the content. That's all of it. Now, as I didn't mention at the top, but one of the things I want to mention is that contributing to open source is not only through code. It is where it started. It is still how a lot of things in open source is done and how a lot of contributions are made, but it's definitely not the only way you can contribute. You can also contribute through writing documentation. And so there's different kinds of documentation. The one is, of course, just literally documenting something. Let's say, for example, React, and React has useEffect, and you write the documentation for useEffect. Maybe you have some examples, that kind of thing. Or it could be something like really big, like MDN content. So one of the things you can do is you don't have to be on the MDN Web Docs page to do this. So let's go back to the dashboard, actually, so I can show you that. So when you're here,
it might also be worth just giving a bit of an overview of what exactly MDN is. Just
okay,
for
yeah,
anyone
sure.
who doesn't know, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'm making some assumptions here. So MDN Web Docs is, I guess, the largest, but also the most trusted resource on the web if you want to look up anything related to the open web. So that is like your standard stuff. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript. They go beyond that, and then the web APIs. So, fetch and animation API and HTTP codes. Those pages are used quite a lot. Like if you want to know what HTTP 418 is, something to do with T, you can find that on MDN Web Docs. If you want to know what a 404 is, you can find that there as well. That's also an HTTP code.
Might be worth maybe just opening MDN in your browser as well. Actually, just like showing
sure
MDN
thing.
itself. Yes.
Yeah, sure thing. Developer. And that is it. And then under the references, that is pretty much what I was referring to. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but then also the web APIs, your HTTP protocols, and all the other things. So if we go into JavaScript, and we look at built-in objects, and we go to array, then we have all of those. And if we go from there, we go to filter maybe. Now we can see documentation specifically on the filter function on the array object. And it contains a whole bunch of stuff, like it has the little interactive example at the top, which is a live code example. You can edit the code in here and play around with this. You're not limited to this one, but generally you'll use it for the specific API you're looking at. And the same goes for CSS and HTML, by the way. It has some syntax examples, a description. It has further examples of how you might want to use it. It has links through to the specification, and then it has the browser compatibility data, which I will also have, because the browser compatibility data is an entire massive project all by itself, which we'll look at in a second. So that's the browser compat, and then at the bottom, it just like links off to some other stuff. And at the bottom here, which is nice, and a lot of documentation sites tend to do this, they have some links that you can quickly get to if you want to make an edit or if you want to report any issues with it. So, that is the MDN site, and you can search for anything that you want, like most websites. They also have some guides and some other things here. So, but if you want to contribute, for example, to anything, but we're going to use MDN for right now, so you press / that opens the search bar. So the first thing I'm going to do is type org colon, and then type MDN. So now I'm limiting it to the MDN org. And I'm going to say I want is issue. So I only want to see issues. And I only want to see issues that have been labeled good first issue. And now if your search string has spaces in, then you put it in little quotes. So when you press enter on that, now it's bringing all issues that has a label called good first issue on the MDN org. The problem here is it's going to show even issues that are closed. So you want to say is open. So now you're going to see issues labeled good first issue that is open. So now we're down to a more manageable number. And you'll immediately see an interesting thing here. Here's content, but here's also translated content. So here's another way you can contribute to open source. You can help to translate content so that it's accessible to more people, because not everybody in the world necessarily understands English or understands it well enough to be able to especially use it as a learning resource, like MDN's a learning resource. So a lot of people prefer to have it available in their language. So sometimes the issues that exist on translated content is literally a new page has been added to MDN and they need help with people translating it. There's all kinds of additional, so the label that I'm using here, good first issues, you can use a ton of other labels. And depending on the repository, there are different ones. If you, for example, on MDN, you can filter by, like here, L10N-FR. So if you know French, you can limit it down to only those. Some projects and organizations don't use good first issue. They have it, but they don't really use it. So you'll search and, oh, there's nothing. But then if that's the case, try help wanted. The only thing about that is sometimes help wanted means something slightly different. So, but you'll quickly realize that once you click through to one of the issues that when you read through them sounds like something you might want to get involved with. Because what some people mean by help wanted is, here's an issue that's been logged by somebody. I, as a member of the project, have looked at this, but I'm not quite getting it. I'm not sure if I'm missing something. I'm not sure if there's some historical context that I don't know. So I would like some help from the wider team. That's what some people use help wanted for. So I would first go for good first issue. If you don't find anything, then try help wanted. Now, sometimes, and GitHub is working on this, sometimes they do allow you to do this kind of deal. So when you do or, so you do label, and then you include, oops, and then you include good first issue. Let's see if this works. See,
label as a typo. Yes.
Yeah.
It might also be worth to quickly show that search syntax tips down there, just to show people where they can kind of
yes.
get a sense of like what are the things that you're actually doing there.
Yeah. So if there's a whole page in the GitHub docs that basically shows you, so all those things that I'm doing, like is open, and label, just it tells you to use a label. There's a whole ton you can do here. Like you can specify a specific repo, or like I'm doing, I'm specifying an org, but you can also limit it down to the user. Here's language identifier. So if you only want to look at stuff that is for HTML or for CSS or for JavaScript, you can do all that kind of stuff. And in fact, if you go to a lot of these like collections that they have on GitHub, that's how a lot of them are made up. Not all of them. There's actually a project on GitHub which you can contribute to as well, called GitHub Collections. I can actually, let me GitHub, I think it's /collections. Yeah, so these are collections that's community curated. So these are repositories, things made in Brazil. But if you go to, for example, one of these is a collection around contributing, and here's some repositories here, and you can suggest edits. And when you go in there, again, there is a repository here by GitHub called Explore, to which you can contribute. And you can create either your own collection, or you can contribute to an existing collection, improving it and that kind of thing. But a lot of them, there's a lot of other, like for Oktoberfest and that kind of thing, a lot of the ways that they find the issues that people share is using the search syntax. Because what you can do also, but I have to tell you about a bug when I do that. So when you, for example, here, let's add the is open here as well. Okay, so you can save this search. But now the important thing to remember is don't use spaces. Because if you use spaces, it'll save it, but if you try to use it, it says that there might be a problem with the identifier, but it does actually work. I have filed an issue for this. And that leads me into another thing, which is another way you can contribute to open source. Creating issues. So if you use a piece of open source, or you read MD and web docs and you find, I'm not so sure if this is quite correct, or I know this to be wrong because maybe you're involved with the standards bodies or something like that. Creating an issue is a means of contributing to open source because you are highlighting a potential problem or a bug or security issues to a project. And by doing that, you are taking the first step in improving this open source project for everybody that uses it. I once spoke to a person called Molly who works at Mozilla, and she told me that a well-written bug report is worth its weight in gold. Because if you see there's a new issue raised against something, and then you're like, oh, somebody have an issue. You go to the issue and there's very little data in there. It's kind of frustrating because you want to help this person. You want to know if this is really a problem. But now you have to start the back and forth of, can you give me a little bit more information? How would I reproduce it? And there's something I'll show you in a second that can help with that GitHub has introduced quite a while ago, but maybe not everybody knows about that, called issue templates. But even then, there's issue templates, there's issue template forms. I don't want to go into too many of these things because this is like big talks themselves. But anyway, you can save this.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that this is something that I find quite often with people kind of who want to have a go at this type of thing is you don't even need to have the solution. Sometimes you can just point out something. Honestly, earlier this year, I had an issue on the Svelte documentation where on one of the pages, like one of the sentences was just super ambiguous. My Afrikaans is kicking in. Ambiguous. Ambiguous. Yeah. And I literally filed an issue and I'm like, I'm not clear what this is referring to. And they actually updated the sentence, and they asked me, is it like, does it make more sense now? And I said yes, and they closed the issue. Cool. I've contributed to open source. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly. And that is such an important thing to do as well, because as I mentioned, there's a lot of people who English is not their first language. So if something is ambiguous to somebody who uses English quite often, then imagine somebody for whom it's like their third or fourth language. So highlighting these areas where, and I mean, you know, there's this line where you become pedantic and where people are like, oh, the grammar Nazi is here again. So, you know, but highlighting those things and saying, for me, I know what you mean, but could we rephrase it in this manner? Again, that's another way of contributing. You might be really good at language. And because one of the things that they say when you write documentation is to aim for a 5th grade reading level. If you do that, then you're pretty good and you're sure that you're not using too much jargon and that kind of thing where somebody would read a paragraph and be like, I don't know what I read just now. So yeah, that's a very, very good point.
Might also be worth just taking a step back, explaining what issues are as well.
Yes, good point. So you can see I have 2 saved ones here, saved searches. So cool. And then when you search again, your saved searches will pop up here at the top. You'll see the second one. I can show you what I mean. If I use that, it fills it in. And it actually works, but I think if you go to code, yeah, it says here possible unrecognized qualifier. So, but it actually still works. It's just that GitHub has a bit of a bug there. So as it's a bug, you would file an issue for that. in the case of this, it's a little tricky where you would file that, because maybe one way you could go about this is you could go to the GitHub docs. So that would be docs.github.com, I believe. And you could look here for the page that explains saved searches, and then maybe raise the issue against that documentation, saying maybe you should make mention that you shouldn't be using spaces. But also, by the way, this is what's happening in the UI. And what you could do in that case is you could take a screenshot. Also, you can include the link to the page where you saw this happening. And you can, and one of the common ways that people do these is they tend to do, this is what I expected, this is what happened. So that gives people an idea of maybe the expectation they're setting is already the problem, even before it comes to what you've seen and what you've experienced. Maybe just how they started off explaining this thing is already introducing the first part of the problem, and it's not just the fact that you've used spaces. So, but let's jump into something else that I wanted to do, because I think I've spent quite a bit of time on this. So let's start a new project. And I'm going to do this a little different than you might normally think of doing it. So let me do it. I'm going to go. So this search bar also allows you to jump around places. So I want to go to the mechanical ink organization. So I start typing that and press enter. It's will jump there. And now I can create a new repository. So I'll click that. Now you can see at the top, it says repository template. So that's another thing. When you create a new repository on GitHub, you can choose to make it a template repository. With a template repository, you can later use that as the template for a new one. And that's exactly what I'm going to do in this case. What I'm looking for is the template called Project Template Essentials. So I'm going to choose that. I'm only going to grab the main branch, because I'm not interested in any of the additional feature branches created. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And I'm going to call it, let's call it FETSA open source demo repository for the FETSA talk. And I'm going to make it public. And I'm going to create repository. Okay, so now it's creating a new repository, which is basically a folder with a bunch of stuff in it. And it's copying in everything from that template repository into this one. Now, the reason I did it this way is for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's really useful because you don't have to like copy and paste a whole bunch of stuff. But the other thing is this Project Template Essentials is, well, let me go a little bit back into the history. So on MDN, we decided to create a project template, and I did some research, and I found the Cloud Native Foundation, which is a massive organization on GitHub and just in general. They have a thing called a project template. And so I used their project template, but then because it's open source, we could change it to fit the needs we had on MDN. But that one still exists, and I still maintain that one as well. But that one's got quite a lot that you probably don't need for most open source projects, especially early on, because it has stuff around governance and all this type of stuff, and contributor ladders and stuff like that. A whole separate talk can be done just on that project template. But what I wanted to do is create a pared down version of that one that I think you could use for everyone, every new project you create. And I'm going to touch on specific ones now and why they exist. So we now have a new repository. So if somebody finds something and they're like, oh, I think you should change this to match how it looks in the GitHub UI now, you could go to Issues and to New Issue. And from here, so this is what we talked about when I mentioned issues previously. This is where you would create a new issue. And you will give it a title, let's say update screenshot in README. And then here is where you will go and you'll provide all the additional details. Maybe you'll say where in the UI things have changed and what people should be using going forward, and you'll describe your whole issue, and then you'll submit it. I won't submit this one right now, but so this is what an issue is. An issue is a bug, but it's a broader term because, like I said, code is not the only thing that happens here. So it's not necessarily a bug. You can also use this for feature requests. You could technically use this to start a discussion, but GitHub introduced discussions a while ago. That is more meant specifically for kind of open-ended type of discussions or FAQ type things, or even general support. A lot of bigger open source projects on GitHub uses discussions for support. Like I'm struggling to use this, it doesn't quite work, and people from the community as well as maintainers can jump in and help people. But yeah, let me go back to the code tab. So I want to open another repository here. So I'm just going to duplicate this tab. And this one, I'm going to go to my account, and then I'm going to go to, oops. So, okay. Oh, there we go. I did jump. Okay. So this project I started before I had the project template. So it's not, I didn't start it from that, but it contains the same things. And the first thing I want to show you is if you go to Insights, there's a tab called Community Standards. And when you click on that, it's going to show you a couple of things that GitHub recommends you should have when you start a repository. And the reason for it is a lot of this signals intent to potential users, but also potential contributors to your project. It gives them a sense of, have you considered other people contributing to your project? How welcoming is this project likely to be? And one of the first things that they're going to look for is this code of conduct. Now, if we go back to this one comes with a code of conduct. The other thing that's nice in the GitHub UI is that it's highlighted here. So if you simply click over to that tab, it's going to surface your entire, I use the contributor covenant code of conduct. It's pretty much a standard thing that's been evolved and improved over time through a community of people interested in open source and making it a welcoming place. So it has a bunch of standards here, enforcement responsibilities. This is very, very important that this part is there and that you take this seriously. It informs about the scope. And then here you will see it has this line here. And this is important to always look for, that this is not left as a comment, so to speak, because that means somebody copy and pasted and they didn't really care about the fact. Of course, I'm being a bit harsh here because people could forget, but you would think that people would have thought through this and they would have done this very intentionally and therefore known that somewhere in here I need to tell people how to get a hold of me or how to get a hold of people in the community so that they can, raise issues around people's behavior or something like that. So that's the very, very first thing most people will look at when they look at contributing to a project is, do you have a code of conduct? It is also then one of the things that the community standards calls out. The next thing is a README. And the reason why that's important, now the project template comes with 2 READMEs. Now, the first README is the one that you'll see when you land on, and that's the README for this project. So it explains what this project is and everything around that. But that's not the README that you will use for your project. You'll actually use the README template. And in this README template, if you just open it like this, you can see there's a bunch of placeholders. But how you really want to do it is you want to edit this, because in there is some comments that gives you some guidance and links to further reading as you fill this in. The reason why README is important is, again, it signals intent, but what it also is, it's an opportunity for you to think through your project a little bit. One thing that I've added to this that is not in the one from the CNCF is this specific little section over here called our Code of Conduct Standards. Now, if we go back to the Code of Conduct, you will see there's this section called our standards. What I like to do is I like to take this and put it in the README immediately. Sorry, I went to the wrong one. Into the README directly. Because now some people might not look for the Code of Conduct. They might not read the entire Code of Conduct. But at least now you have highlighted the top examples of the behavior you expect and the unacceptable behaviors. So even if somebody's only looked at your README, they've already seen these things. You've already signaled what it is that you expect and do not want from people contributing and interacting and using your project. This governs all of that kind of stuff. So that is the README. And also your README should then link off to all these other things. So your README will link off like here, it would link off to your complete code of conduct. Now for some projects, for example, where did I, oh yes. So the contributing one is what you will commonly find that called CONTRIBUTING.md. And this is where you'll put instructions for how somebody can contribute to your project. Now, you could, so sometimes it feels like it's a little too much. Like for example, for this project, there's not a heck of a lot to do. But with that said, each of these bullet points, one can expand upon a little bit because you want to make it as easy as possible for somebody to contribute and have a successful first contribution. So the more you can do to help them make that first successful contribution, the better. You can, for example, in here, something that I should do is you can link to the good first issues in your repository, so people don't even have to go and search for them. They can just immediately click a link and find good first issues. So if you have maybe a just introductory section with the basic stuff of like, if you want to contribute to this project, and then link off to your contributing file, that is where that thing comes into play. So this is where you'll go into depth, like exactly these are the dependencies, these technologies you'll need, this is some prerequisites that you need to have, go into as much detail as possible to make it really easy for people to contribute. Then if we go back to insights and community standards, now we're touching on licensing. This is a very, very big topic. It's a complicated topic, but I think for the most part, what I want to, there's a couple of things that I think is really important. The first thing is, if you create a, let's say, a repository like this one, if you create a repository like this one and it does not contain a license file, it is not open source. That is very, very important to understand. Until you've added that license, it is not open source. And in fact, if you put this on GitHub and I remove this license file, this repository is now, it conforms to the terms of service of GitHub. That is what governs it until you've added that license file. So saying that anybody can use, I don't care, I'm not going to add a license. Until you've done that, it's not open source, and people can actually not do with it whatever they want, even if that is your intent. So the very, very first thing that is important is this license. So the license that comes default with the template is the MIT license, and it's simply because it's a super permissive, very straightforward, like literally 3-paragraph license file. But you do not need to use the MIT. You could choose to use a different one. And one of the ways that you can go about it is what I like to do if the content is not so much code, but it's maybe you're writing a, let's say, for example, MDN again. So that's a lot of writing, a lot of technical writing, a lot of code examples, that kind of stuff. So what might be more appropriate there is something like one of the Creative Commons licenses. Now, the Creative Commons has got a license chooser, which is really useful. Now, If you don't know the license that you want, you can go into no, and you can step through the whole process of specifying how to handle attribution, commercial use. That essentially says, can people use this in a commercial setting? Can they create derivative work? So can they take yours and make something else based on the work that you've done? What is the sharing requirements? And then this is just a section to confirm that the licensing is appropriate, and then finish. But if you know, then you can click yes. And if you want to say, if you do really say, I don't care what people do with this, it's completely free, no license restrictions of any kind applied, you could go in and choose CC 1.0. That is essentially you're committing this to the public domain. So you can use a CC 1.0 universal license, and then you are waiving all copyright to this. This is public domain. Anybody can do whatever they want with it. If you want to go a little stricter, you can go to your CC 4.0. So the thing that changes now is credit must be given to the creator. You can still do all the things you could have done before, but now you have to give credit to whoever made this. And if you want to go a little further, you can include the SA, which is the share alike. And now that says, not only do you need to give credit to the people or the person who created this, but when you make adaptations and you share this, it needs to be under the same terms. And once you're done with that, you click next, you fill in the details about the title of the work, who the creator is, links to it, and you get a little license here that you can copy into that license file. What MDN has done is they also link, so I can quickly show you here. No, not there. Yeah. So what they've done is an interesting thing, and that is because of the long history of MDN, is their content repository is actually dual licensed. So if you go into their license file, you'll see that here is the text is included of that, but also they have all prose content. So everything that's not code examples is licensed by CC by SA. So that means it is a Creative Commons license that you have to say who wrote it, and you have to keep the same license when you share it again. But then there's this even more complicated thing about added on or before or after August 2010. All the code examples is that CC0 that we just looked at. So in other words, public domain. So all code examples on MDN for everything after August 2010 is public domain. So you don't even have to say that you got this from MDN. You can just use it freely. So if you want to go that way, that is an option, but you do need to add a license. If you want to look
so the
at
implication, so just to confirm, so the implication would be that you can't effectively print out the entire MDN and sell it as a book. So at the very least, you need to, whatever you derive from it, also needs to be free, correct?
Yes, 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 that's correct. And if you want to look at the OSI approved licenses, so this is licenses approved by the Open Source Initiative, you would go to opensource.org/licenses. And it works similarly to Creative Commons, except here you don't fill in the details. You can search for one. Like if you want to know more about the GPL, you can type that in, you can hit search, and then you can click, and here it tells you that this is uncategorized, but it is an approved license. You can read all the details. So I think the ones that are mostly used, and they will, let me show you. If you, for example, search for the Apache license, so if you go there, you can see here it's a popular license with a strong community. So these are generally the ones you want to go for, and I think the ones used most is the Apache 2 license, the MIT license, and then the MPL, so the Mozilla Public License. That's one that's also used pretty frequently. But I think the ones used most is the Apache license, MIT, MPL, and then to some extent GPL. That's especially on the Linux side. They tend to use the general public license quite a lot. But again, there's a lot here. The most important thing I want you to take away from this is that if you don't add a license file to your repository, it's not open source. It is in fact controlled by wherever you're sharing that code. So if it's on GitHub, you're adhering to the terms and conditions of GitHub. So the only time when you move away from that is when you add that license file. Whoa. Sorry, suddenly started talking in my ear. I don't know why. Hopefully she goes away soon. There you go. Issue went away. Okay. Let me go back. All right. So there's a maintainers file here. It's not one that's called out, but it's something that's nice to kind of have there, especially once this grows a little bit more. So this allows you to say who are the people that you can contact if you have any questions and who's responsible for this repository and the project at large sometimes. This one also includes a reviewing document because that's kind of important. So let's say, for example, trying to think how we can do this. Okay, let's say we want, okay, let me see what's in maintainers. Maybe I can make some changes to this one. Okay, so there's some stuff still from the CNCF project in here. Okay, so I want to edit this. Very first thing I'm going to do before I'm going to change anything, and this is generally considered best practice. So I'm going to go back to the root here. I'm going to go to issues. And now I'm going to create a new issue for real. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say it's a chore. I'm going to say update maintainers document. Okay, so I'll copy a link to it. Okay, let's say the current maintainers document. Oops. Still contain references to the CNCF. So the yeah, whoops. And then I'm linking to the document I'm referring to. Obviously, once this has been fixed, this will link to a maintainers file that is correct, but that's okay. So I've included that, and I'm going to submit my new issue. Okay, so now I have an issue that I can reference. Because I can, I'm going to assign it to myself, but generally a project maintainer will have to do that. You will not normally have access to be able to do that unless it's your own project. Same goes for labels. Sometimes you'll be able to label stuff, but for the most part, it's again the project owner, maintainers that will add the appropriate labels, anything like that. Now, one thing I can show is I like to use a chore label. And it's not one of the default ones that GitHub creates for you when you create a new repository. So you can do that very easily. You type in what you, I don't create new label, chore, and then I normally call it, it's a routine task. And save. And so now I have a chore label. Okay. Now I'm going to go in here and I want to change this. Now I have a couple of options for changing. So before I make any final changes, I'm going to do the first thing, because now I am a contributor to this project. So I'm not going to make changes directly here. First thing I want to do is I want to fork this project. So by doing that, I'm creating a copy of this project to my own account. So in this case, it's going to say, yeah, cool, I want to do it here. Again, I'm going to say, just copy the main branch only. If there's any other branches, don't need those. So it's going to create that fork. Again, it's copying all of that now down into this new repository that's under my personal account. So now I have that. Okay, this is the document I want to change. There's a couple of ways I can go about this. One way, and I'm not sure that I'm going to do this one because then I have to share different windows and stuff like that. So I'm not going to, but the one thing you could do is you could do this through the terminal. You can also do this through GitHub Desktop. But the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to just use the GitHub web editor. So this is different to GitHub code spaces. It's simplified. It's not going to, it runs a version of VS Code in the browser, but not the full one. It's not syncing with your VS Code settings and all that kind of stuff. It's something to make a simple change. So like the one I want to make now. And one way to do that is to press the period key on your keyboard. So a little dot at the end of a sentence. So when you do that, it's going to throw you into your web editor. Okay, it's setting up the web editor. Okay. So here on the side is the source control. And over here is a little icon that says create a pull request, commit and push, and view as tree. And there's all kinds of options that you can do here. And there's branch, create branch. And that's the first thing you want to do, because you don't want to work directly on main. The idea with how you work in a workflow like this is you have your main, which is your source of truth. This is the thing that goes to production. And then you create a branch off of that main, so it creates yet another copy. And you call it something that, well, there's a couple of, one of the ways, the way I like to name things is I start with the ID of the issue, and then a shortened version of it if the title of it is too long. So let me show you. So now create a new branch. So if I go back here, so the ID of this issue is 1, and it's called chore update maintainers document. So if I go in here, I can say 1 chore update maintainers document. And so that's the name of the branch. And when I press enter, it's now going to create the new branch, and then I'm telling it, yes, switch to that branch. So now it's reloaded, and I am in that branch now. So instead of being on the main branch, I'm now in this new one. At this point, it's exactly the same code still, exactly the same. But now we're going to change things. So now we open maintainers. And so we want to keep that, but maybe the only things we want to do is we maybe want to delete this because it's not really relevant to this anymore. So we just want to clean it up a little bit. Maybe we want to add a heading as well. So project maintainers, something like that. Okay, save. So now we've made our change. Now, if you can see here in the left-hand side in our source control, it says there's one pending change. So if we go here, you can see our maintainers. If we click on that, it shows us this was removed and this was added. So this is what we're going to be updating, and this is what the file looked like before we've made our changes. So that
Skulk.
Go.
It might just be worth zooming in a little bit.
Yeah. That's
just for those on smaller screens.
Very true. So then we go back
yes,
there. Oops.
That should be good.
So yeah, now you can see, again, it shows that I've added this project maintainers heading, and I've removed these 2 paragraphs at the bottom. So that's cool. That's exactly what I wanted. So now I can go in here and I can add a message. So I'm just going to say updated document removed. Oops. Paragraphs and added. Oops, added title. Okay. And with that, we hit commit and push. And now it's pushed that stuff up to the repository. So now we can go back. Oops, sorry about all the motion there. So you click at the bottom left, there's a thing that says GitHub. You click on that and you say go to repository. Now it's going to take you back to the repository. And here at the top, we can see, oh, there's a pull request. And that is the changes we just made. So if we click on that, we're going to open a pull request. And a pull request is you're telling the maintainers, hey, I've done some work, and I'd like for you to actually make this part of the repository. And this is why I created an issue first, so that I'm referencing an issue. I'm not just randomly opening a pull request. Sometimes it's appropriate to do that, but most of the times it's best to start off with an issue. And depending on the project, you might wait until the maintainer has gotten back to you before you actually do the work, just to be sure that you're not doing work that is either planned or that is out of scope, or that maybe you just misunderstood something, because now you might waste some time. You might go down a rabbit hole and fix some stuff, and actually it wasn't a problem to begin with. It's just a misunderstanding, or it's out of scope, and maybe there's a different way to handle this. So I'm going to click this compare and pull request, but I have found in the past, but I think this one's going to be cool. But I've sometimes found that when I click this, it wants to create a pull request to the same repository I'm on, but let's hope it doesn't do that this time. Let's see. No, it's doing the right thing. And the way I know that is because it's telling me you want to take from this branch called one sure update maintainers document, from that branch on this version of this project, so on my user, you want to take those changes and you're proposing to merge it into the main branch of the Mechanical Ink version of this project. And that's exactly what I want to do. It's also telling me it's able to merge, which means this doesn't mean that the project owners has already somehow given me the go-ahead. This just means there's no conflicts. Somebody hasn't made a change to this document in between the time I started working on it and now, that is causing a conflict. So Git is like, I'm not so sure. Like, you removed this, but this person edited it. I'm not sure if you want to remove it, or you just want to accept the edit, or you want to do a combination of those things. So in those cases, you'll get what is known as a merge conflict. And now a human needs to address this. A human needs to make decisions about whether, do I still want to remove this, or do I need to have a conversation with somebody about, why did you edit it? Shouldn't we just remove it? But it's human intervention is needed. In this case, it's all good. Everything is clean. There's no problems. I would probably, so the way I did that is not the cleanest interface ever. So what I have here, I would probably want that in the actual description down here, not so much here. Here, what I like to do is I like to kind of match what the issue was. So it was called chore update maintainers document. Update maintainers document. Now here's another thing that's really cool on GitHub, and I believe GitLab and a lot of the others that now also do that. And that is, there's some keywords you can use. And one of them is fix. So if I type fix and I then put a hash, you'll see it immediately suggesting this one to me. This is by happenstance because there's only one issue, so it's pulling up the right one. But if I typed one and there were more, then it'll start filtering it. But if you now press enter, it doesn't look like much, but you'll see how this changes soon. And when you scroll down again, you can see the same thing we kind of saw inside the web editor, which is we're adding this, we're removing this. I'm like, okay, that's all good. Again, a lot of the things on the side here, you may or may not have access to depending on the settings of the project. Because I own both, I have full access, so I can assign. But for now, we will just leave it like that. Here's another thing to be aware of. If you keep this checked, and I would say if you're new to using GitHub, using Git, contributing to a project, I would leave this checked, because what that does is it allows edits by the maintainers. So maybe you're very, very new to all of this, and you've opened a pull request, and now the maintainers come back and they require changes. They're like, this is nice, but I would recommend you do this in a slightly different way. Now you need to update, because you don't want to open a separate pull request. You're going to edit the contents of your existing pull request and just update the pull request with your changes in what is known as a separate commit. So every time you make changes and you commit those changes using Git, it creates a separate piece of work that it can uniquely identify. But in the beginning, you might struggle with that. And you might say, oh, I'm not sure what to do, or you might do, and you might mess things up a little bit. If you leave this box checked, it allows the maintainers to edit it and fix it for you and say like, oh, look, this is what I meant. This is how it should have been. If you uncheck that, they aren't able to do that. They then have to go and raise a pull request against your repository, against your branch, and then you have to merge it over there, and it adds quite a bit of complexity. So I would recommend keeping that checked. And again, depending on the repository, you could have access to a thing called a draft pull request. That just means this isn't ready for review yet. I'm still working on it, but I want to show you what I've done so far. In this case, we'll just leave the default one, and you hit create pull request. And now it's a pull request. And here's the interesting thing now. You'll see that that #1 is changed into a link. And it actually links back to this issue. So if we click on it, it takes us to that issue that we raised a little while. And there's more to it than that. That's the start of it. So let's say a maintainer has come in and they've had a look and they're like, yeah, now this looks good. I'm happy with these changes. They will hit review changes and they can comment, approve, request changes. I can't approve my own changes. So I'm going to have to kind of hijack this one, or I can go into settings. No, let me not do that. But normally, you could do one of these three. You could either just leave a comment. So you could say, I like this, but I would prefer if you make this one change. Or you can outright approve it and say, this is good. Or you can actually say, this isn't quite ready for merging yet. I request that you make the following changes before, and then you need to re-request review. So, but let's say that this is all good. Now I'm going to merge the pull request. I have a couple of different ways of how I can, but this is getting into the weeds, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. So I'm just going to go ahead and merge this pull request. Confirm, and it's merged it. What this delete branch, what this means is it deletes this new branch that you created, this one called 1-chore. Because it's been merged into main, you may not need it anymore, so you can safely just go ahead and delete that branch. It keeps the repository cleaner and uses less data over time. You'll see here in issues, it still has a little 1, but that's just because the GitHub UI hasn't updated yet. If you actually go back to issues, that issue that we had is closed. And that is because when we added that #1, fix #1, it created an association between the pull request and the issue. And therefore, you can see it's also updated this with some comments and some referring back here to the pull request. And when that one was merged, it automatically closed the issue for us. So that is something that a lot of maintainers will really appreciate if you do. And that is one way of making a change like that. And that is how easy it can be to contribute. You don't even have to leave your browser to do that. So I think that's a lot. So I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen and jump back into StreamYard. And there you are.
Yes. So I do want to ask you to maybe show one more thing,
Yes,
which
sure
I think would be really helpful, but I didn't want to preempt you if you actually wanted to show it. So what might be a good example would be, let's just open a random MDN page. Let's say you find something that seems strange, or you find, let's just say you find a typo on a specific page. Let's say you're reading something on MDN. What would the process, I'm also happy to do it if you want to, but maybe you can just do it since you already have everything set up, is what would the process be like? Figuring out, okay, what file do I need to change, and so forth and so forth. So I think maybe if we can go through that up until the point where you need to create the pull request, I think that would be really useful.
Okay, you mean create the issue, or do you mean create the pull request itself?
Pull request, yes.
Okay, all right.
Because something like so I've done this a lot in the past. If it's like a spelling mistake or something, like there's no reason to create a separate issue. I generally just create a pull request that effectively says, what does this fix? Yeah.
Okay.
I can also show that if you want, or yeah.
No worries. So I can let me think about it. Let's do two things. Okay, let me share my screen again. Window, that one, share. Okay, so earlier today I spoke to somebody and we had a look at ARIA keyboard shortcuts. And what I found was that it doesn't contain any BCD data, so browser compat data. And I was like, oh, I wonder why that is. I wonder if maybe there isn't any compat data. And then, but what I did is I went to Can I Use? So Can I Use is a website where you can go if you want to find out if you can use a specific web technology, like a specific function or a specific CSS property or HTML elements, stuff like that. But the thing is, not that recently anymore. I guess it's 2 years ago, maybe it's even longer. A lot of Can I Use data is now powered by the MDN browser compat data. But there's still sometimes they have some data that MDN doesn't yet have. So I did this thing and I was like, wait, the support data here is powered by browser compat data. So that suggests to me that browser compat data does have this. So what I could do, this won't create a pull request, but I'll do that after this one, is I could be like, oh, I wonder why this doesn't have it. So I can report an issue. So I click the link down there, and you can see they use issue forums. This is relatively new to GitHub. Before, you would just have a normal text area with some markdown in there that's comments that kind of guide you and say, this is the stuff that we want. But what you can do with the forums is you can actually add required fields and stuff like that. So it makes it really nice. So what I can do here is I can say, missing compatibility data for ARIA, and it's called keyboard shortcuts. Yeah, keyboard shortcuts. So this is pre-populated. This is the actual page that we came from. So here it's saying what specific section. So I'll just say.
Yeah, so that's also one of the things I wanted you to highlight is that, specifically like whether it's the React documentation or whatever, when I just started out with open source, I would go through the repo and just try and grep and find like, where's the file, until I actually realized like most of these things have a link that you can click that opens a pull request with like that specific file targeted and everything already.
Yeah, and from the community stuff also, you can see on the side here, those contributing guidelines and code of conduct is pulled up right here because it exists here. So what information was incorrect and not incomplete? So I would say it seems that so BCD is short for browser compat data. Data is missing from the page. So you have to, when you update an MDN page, there's a macro that's used to include the browser compat data. And it could be that in this case, that macro wasn't included. So I just want to see the other questions. OK, yes, so I'll expand on this a little later. What did you expect to see? Expected to see the browser compatibility, compatibility table for the, for the keyboard shortcuts. That's completely misspelled. Keyboard shortcuts. Yeah. And then here I will say that
can maybe include a screenshot of it from Can I Use that shows that it is available.
Yeah, I can do that.
One thing that's also really useful is, I don't know if this is just on my device, but I can literally copy and paste and it automatically uploads the image and links it and whatever in there. So if I take my screenshot, my screen snipping tool thing, and if it's in my clipboard, and I just right click paste or whatever, it actually uploads it and links it for me automatically. Yeah.
Wow, that's neat. I'll try it. I have this open source
Yeah.
one that I used called Shutter. I'll try it now with that one. From can I use and it suggests that Indian does have his data available in the ECD repo. So I'll put that there. Okay. And then let's do that. Copy. Let's see what happens. Paste. Yay, it works.
Did you not know about that?
No, you just taught me something.
All right. There you go. For more GitHub tips, smash that subscribe button. Leave a like for your daily GitHub tips. Yeah. No, that's how I like, sure, man. Like I have to do so many like UI bugs and stuff on a daily basis. I would lose my mind if I had to manually upload the files.
Yeah, that's a nice power feature there. I wonder if all of these screenshot tools does that. Anyway, this one's called Shutter. It's open source. So
I think if there's an image in your clipboard, you'll
It'll
see
work.
it actually pushes it up to the actual GitHub CDN. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super cool. Screenshot showing that ECD task suggesting contains support. Not the best ARIA alt text in the world, this, but
it's supporting. It's not like critical content.
Yeah, exactly. Attribute. Okay. There's nothing more. And then this one at the bottom, you can always just kind of ignore. You'll see more. I think it's surfaced on the page once you open the issue. I'm not sure, but this is just some details that's automatically grabbed from that page. So, right, submit new issue. There it is. Oh yeah, here we go. So there's a screenshot, and here's all this information, and then there's that page report. So this is, and here is the cool thing. That is the file that you're going to want to update. Is this one, ENUS Web Accessibility, ARIA Attributes, ARIA Keyboard Shortcuts. You will also see that the GitHub bot is ran, and it's so they have a GitHub bot that's kind of started labeling it, and it's doing content accessibility, and it's added and needs triage. This signals to the team that they need to have a look at this issue, and it's also going to ping some people that's in the accessibility team, so to speak, on MDN. But let's have a look here at, let's do a search for label first issue. Let's see. I want it to be open. I don't want to see closed issues.
I actually use my GitHub foo now to actually find the issues. I shared it in the text chat. If anyone wants to, upvote that, I'm going to upvote it right now. It's going to be like 50 upvotes tomorrow morning. This is a really important issue, guys. Come on.
Yeah, I would say it's important.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's an issue. Go for it.
No, I just like gave it a thumbs up. Yeah.
Let's see if this is something that needs to be fixed. Because I see somebody from Mozilla has gotten back here. It says, looks like the heading is correct since it's about this paragraph, somewhat confusing. It could be changed to which can be used.
So that's a good example of what I spoke about previously. You know, like don't overestimate like what an or underestimate what an actual issue can be. An issue can
Yeah.
be like literally, this is confusing. Is there maybe a better way to write this? And you might even do a pull request that has a recommendation. And that's what I ended up doing with the Svelte stuff. I was like, hey, maybe we can phrase it, maybe it can be phrased as follows. And they're like, hey, that makes sense. So just merge it in and update it, the Svelte documentation automatically.
Yeah, exactly. And so here, the person who originally opened it came back, and seems like they're still believe that there's something that they'd like to change here. Nonetheless, the page is explaining about RTC, RTP sender, and then the appropriate property should be not that one. So I'm not going to mess with this one.
If you can find a real one, that would be great. But also, we can maybe just
Yeah.
like do a pretend one that goes all the way up to literally just clicking the create pull request button.
Yeah.
And you just don't create the pull request, just to show that process.
Yeah.
Because I do think like that is the most common place where I see people start the open source. They're reading documentation or something, and they see a
Yes.
spelling mistake or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, let's see. Let's have a look at this one. The thing with MDN issues, it's very rarely simple. There's always so much history and stuff about it.
Yes, because it's because you have so many eyes on it that the easy ones are just like catched like super quickly and fixed. So there's maybe like if it might be worth looking at something that's maybe not as popular as MDN, and it might also like. Sure, I don't want to keep us for too long, but it might also be worth just making a quick mention in terms of where are good places to look. I know with the Oktoberfest stuff now recently, they also, I think, compile a list of places that you might want to look for, like that might have issues that are worth tackling. But I think before that, let's maybe just quickly show if you were looking at any random page on MDN and you spot a typo or whatever, how would you just like go and create a pull request? Unless they just want to literally change a letter or something on the page.
Yeah. I mean, let's see. Obviously, the nice thing about raising an issue is you get that for free.
Yeah, someone else does it.
Yeah, where the actual pages that you need to update.
Yeah, I think if you go, you can go edit the page on GitHub. Then it takes it like it sets everything up for you. Does it not? If I'm not mistaken.
It should.
Yes.
Yes, and so at this
then
point
you just
also
fork it. Yeah.
So let's do that. Let's do that. So let's. Yeah, why not? Let's just use this one because we're not going to actually do anything. So yeah, we click edit, and of course, not all the sites will work like this, but a lot of them do. So you are now making changes. I'm making changes in my fork at this point. So this is the other way. This is just using the GitHub UI without going into the web editor or anything like that.
Yeah, I still do that a ton. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, me too.
Yeah, even on my even on code bases that I'm not supposed to, like that cowboy coding is never going to die.
Yeah. I mean, one of the downsides sometimes is that prettier won't run, for example. So you might get to the pull request stage and like one of the linting GitHub actions will fail because it didn't, prettier didn't run, and so now your linting is wrong, and now they're like, oops, you first have to fix the linting before you even review the pull request. That is something that happens. I mean, let's say we think that should be like that. It shouldn't, because technically it's access key, or let's not change that.
What a random grammar thing, yeah.
Yeah, pages functionality. And so I've made that change. So now I'm going to click commit changes.
And it's also important you're not committing this, you're doing it towards your own fork, I think, because this seems very scary. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it says, right, let me close this out. So you're making changes you're making changes in a project you don't have right access to. Submitting a change will write it to a new branch in your fork, so in yours, and then you're making. So this will not just suddenly push something to the main.
All of this seems very scary, but there's there's no way that you can break anything. No,
especially
unless someone explicitly says, yeah, we're gonna allow this code in. Yeah,
exactly. Some repositories like GitHub will warn you immediately when you start a new repository that you should protect your main branch, because otherwise what could happen is somebody could force push stuff to your main branch and then override things. But like on MDN, don't fear. There's a whole bunch of checks and linting and stuff that needs to happen before any of this will ever make it into the main branch. So, I would say generally try and be a little bit more specific here. So maybe just updated grammar. Oops, and then I'll just leave that there and then propose changes. So I believe in this case, what it's going to do is it's created this default like patch -1. So it hasn't given me the option of creating my own name, but it is creating a feature branch. And again, here we can see what it is that we changed. We changed this grammar over here, and then we could say create pull request. And again, this is going to take us to creating the pull request. And now you can see there's some hints here from the folks of MDN asking to provide a description, the motivation of why you're doing this, any additional details. So unlike the issue form that we saw earlier, here it's how issues used to be. Issues used to be like this as well, just some markdown, kind of asking, please provide some additional details. And as I mentioned at the top of the talk, please do provide as much information as possible. Try to avoid creating issues and pull requests that's just a sentence, unless that is all that you know about it. The more information you provide, the faster these things will be able to be resolved. Yeah. Just being a good open source citizen.
Yeah, also ensure that little purple checkbox is selected.
Yes, again there. And again, here you have another chance to just verify that, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. And then I won't go ahead now and click the create pull request, but that will do what we saw on the earlier one. And again, you can see it wants to take patch 1 branch from my fork of this repository and wants to merge that into the main branch of the MDN content repository. So that's the flow of information will be from me to them.
And but what you can reasonably, one thing you can also reasonably expect, because I do a lot of open source pull requests and stuff, is someone's gonna comment on it, even if it's just to say, "Cool, looks good to me," and then they'll merge it in, or they'll comment and say maybe I'm not entirely sure about your suggestion, maybe this or whatever, and there's generally a bit of back and forth, and then it's okay, either you realize okay, cool, actually it doesn't make sense anymore, and you close the pull request, or you kind of sand it a bit down, get it right, and then they merge it. There's usually you generally just expect, okay, someone's gonna just respond to that, and if generally you get those via email. If you have notification, I think it sets it. Obviously, if you do a pull request to something, you are automatically subscribed to get notifications about anything. So you'll at the very least get an email that tells you, hey, someone commented on it.
Yeah, exactly. You can have a quick look at one of these. So somebody opened a pull request, and you can see here's a discussion that happened here, where the MDN linter has actually suggested a linting change. This is automation that's happening here. And it looks like here, somebody pushed an additional commit based on the suggestions that was offered. You see, this is also linter. But you can see here that all of these checks needs to run before anybody can even merge this. So even before a human has looked at this, there's already all these checks and balances. And this one is failing on the lint. And it's making suggestions of what the possible linting errors could be. But yes, there will also be sometimes where, and more often than not, you will have somebody that has a recommendation based on what you do, on what you've suggested. Like it's very rare that you'll open a pull request and it'll just be a R plus or a thumbs up and that's it. It does happen, but it's more often than not there'll be some back and forth discussion. So it don't feel weird if somebody comes back and doesn't just automatically approve your pull request. Nobody expects it to be perfect the first time.
All right. Yeah, that was great. Thanks so much, Skulk. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, no, pleasure.
Yeah, and I also like because last year, also around Hacktoberfest, we also had another talk that was a lot more like practical, like not practical, but like more hands-on in terms of how do you find things, what are things to think about, much more higher level. So I really like appreciate the fact that this wasn't like a slides, but it was actually you sitting down and going through the process. I think it's a really nice addition. To some of the other content we have around this. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then, like I said, I think just in closing, I think it's important to acknowledge that whenever you open an issue or whenever you raise a pull request or anything like that, the feedback you get is not a reflection on you. It is a conversation about something. It's not a reflection on you. Don't take it personally. If you feel that somebody is being aggressive or they're being unfairly insensitive, it's probably not you, and it's probably just time to find a different project to contribute to. Take care of yourself first. There's a lot, it's a big ecosystem. There's a lot of places where you can make a difference, where you can make an impact. If you feel uncomfortable in a situation, feel free to walk away. And closing a pull request is not a sin. It's not a bad thing. If something has come to a point and there's either everybody's agreed that this wasn't the right thing to do, closing a pull request doesn't mean you failed. It just means that there's a different way to solve this problem, and solving it might be closing the pull request. Because I know a lot of people are scared to open because they're like, oh, but what if this is not meant to be perfect? It's a proposal. It's just a proposal of something, and from there a conversation starts. And it might mean that in the end, what you did lands. It might mean it gets completely changed, but it still lands because there was a collaboration that happened. Or it might mean that it gets closed. And all of those are fine. As long as you feel good about the process and you don't feel personally attacked or anything like that, that's just part of the process.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, like, if anything, the ones that are frustrating is where you don't get responses. Like it's useful because, like, even for yourself as a developer, to grow and understand, and I think it's what I really, because I've also been contributing to open source for a very long time, and what I've really found of a lot of value is, like, it gives you such a nice insight into how another, usually someone who's way above you in terms of the food chain, how they think, how they reason, what type of questions they ask. You can learn a lot from that.
Very true. Very, very true.
Yes. Yeah. Cool. So in closing, any plugs you want to do, anything you want to shout out, Skulk? Where can people find you? Where can people get in touch with you?
I think, like, GitHub, just Skulk Nedling on GitHub. That's one place. On LinkedIn, same thing. Just search for my name, you'll find me. I'm not so much on the other socials at the moment. And other than that, like, I'm in the ZA Tech Slack, so feel free to message me there. Happy to have a chat if you have any questions afterwards. If I can help you find some good first issues to work on, anything like that. And same thing on LinkedIn. If you want to reach out, please do. I always enjoy speaking with people. And then me and Skulk have a podcast together called Mental Health and Tech. And I have two others, my CDM Network podcast, which is focused on entry-level web developers. Might be interesting to listen to. If you want to be on the podcast, talk to me. I'd be happy to speak to you. And then the Mechanical Ink podcast, which is all about open source, open science, all these good stuff. So that's all the stuff I do. And other than that, just trying to make cool things.
Yeah. Words to live by. Cool. Awesome, guys. Have a great evening, and thanks for everyone that stuck around till the end. Awesome.
Thanks, folks.
Cool. Bye.
Cheers.